Hi everyone, welcome to another leadership newsletter. And today we're talking about culture. And of course, we know that organizational culture is the kind of the invisible force that often shapes kind of how staff kind of think, they feel, and they behave. And I'm really pleased today that we've got Lekha Sharma here, who's written an incredible book on culture and is going to add a bit of kind of nuance and practical kind of application to our knowledge. So why don't we start with the opposite, I suppose, and what happens when cultures go wrong. So, Lekha, from your experience, kind of as a school leader and as a sort of, I guess, an expert in educational culture, what does an unhealthy culture look and feel like for staff?
It's a great question. I think unhealthy cultures are what I like to call silently loud. And what I mean by that is that often when you're in these cultures and you're in those spaces, even if you're not a part of that group or team, you can kind of sense it. You get a sense of that, you get a feel for that. And they're loud because they can have such far reaching impact on individuals, on the group, on outcomes for the school. And often within these unhealthy cultures, there are breaks in the feedback loop between typically colleagues and leaders. And there are wildly different perceptions of what the real culture and state of play is. And what I mean by that is if you were to then take a group of colleagues and ask them, what's the culture like here?
Yeah,
And then you would go and speak to the leadership team and you'd say, what's the culture like here? You'd hear two very, very different answers.
right.
Um, and I think people in those cultures often say what they think other people want to hear rather than what they truly feel, because of that lack of psychological safety, the ability to kind of share what you really think without any fear of repercussions. And there can be, an apathy towards things like school improvement, and a lack of organisational commitment to the cause, if you like. So,
Yeah,
yeah, silently loud is the phrase I tend to use for thinking about
I
those
love
cultures.
that. And that's really important, that idea of kind of apathy or a lack of commitment.
Mm.
Why does that come? Why does that come about? Do you think?
So I think in those cultures, a lot of this is about feeling truly seen and heard.
Yeah,
And this kind of happens, I think, on an individual level, as, an individual within my own right, I want to feel seen and heard. And then as a team, so as a group of individuals coming together for a common, goal or purpose, feeling seen and heard. And I think when there is a lack of that, when there is that break in the feedback cycle or feedback loop, if you like, that can then result in an apathy, if I'm not feeling seen and heard, then actually why should I go above and beyond?
yeah,
That kind of notion of not being as committed as you could be, and not going the extra mile where typically you might want to go the extra mile because that's who you are. So
yeah.
actually, the conditions and the space that you're in can have a real impact on your motivation, your willingness to engage, and your willingness to be a part of school improvement efforts more broadly.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Yeah. So quietly loud.
Mm.
Fascinating. Well, of course, we know, don't we, that shifts in culture
Hmm.
can make huge changes in an organization. And I know I've certainly felt it in leadership positions that I've held in schools that where we've managed to move the culture into a more positive place, we've seen some real impacts. Have you got any examples that you could draw on from that?
There was a new head teacher going into this role, who was introducing a curriculum framework, and it really was a little bit like, this is our one shot to get this right now because there's
Right.
been a lot of change. And I think what was great about the work that this head teacher did was the recognition and acceptance that actually a lot of the energy needed to be front loaded into addressing the culture and the conditions before anything more specific around school improvement could happen.
Yeah.
And I think this happened in lots of different ways. So if we think about the work of Edgar Schein and culture and the three layers of culture that he refers to, a lot of this was about tackling those underlying assumptions at first. And those assumptions from the past had been things like, we, our opinion is not valued, or well, the leadership are over there and their work is so far removed from our work and they have no idea what it's like in the classroom. So these were the underlying beliefs that this leader was really actively kind of tackling.
Okay.
And a lot of this, I think, was, and then I had the chance to kind of do this analysis of why it was so successful afterwards. And I actually did a bit of research around, teacher voice. And I spent some time with teachers and said, what did this leader do? And what did this group of leaders do that helped that process of change? And I think that clear expectation set a really great tone for the work that was to come, because it was very much like, this is what we stand for. And I think that's what culture really is at the heart of it. And then the other thing I think that worked really well in that situation was in terms of artifacts. So one of the first things that this leader did was share some one-pager routines. So this was things like stopping technique and moving around the school. How do we do it? It's on one page. It was really clear. It had 4 or 5 different things that tools that leaders could go to. And this leader said, we're just going to focus on this for the first 6 weeks, nothing else. We're not going to talk about anything else. Let's just get this right. And I think it was so successfully implemented and staff really bought into it and they could see and experience the success, and it led to this momentum for positive change. And so I think that was a real kind of, the domino moment where you flick the first domino and the rest kind of fall. I think that was a real important, that feeling of success, giving people the taste of that quite early on. So lots to learn from that particular case study, and just some really inspiring people out there doing such amazing work around getting cultures and conditions right.
That sounds great, doesn't it? Yeah, and I think that is really interesting, that what you talked about, in that you can get that snowball effect that once people start to feel a little bit of success or a little bit of belief or a little bit of agency, you start getting them more engaged, and then of course naturally that gets more and more. Well, that is fascinating. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we might finish on then is some more practical advice, because one of the things that sticks with me with culture is that you have a culture, whether you like it or not, and you either design it or you get given it, sort of thing. What practical things can leaders do to kind of shift their cultures?
I think the starting point really needs to be kind of an openness and a stance of inquiry around what is the actual culture here. And in order to do that, we need to have some really open dialogue with colleagues around how they really feel and what their true lived experience of being in that space is. So I think that really, there's a lot of work that goes into that, whether it's individual conversations or group conversations, creating the opportunities for people to share what it feels like for them. And then I think coming back and bringing the work and the space back to purpose is key. Why are we here? And more specifically, why are we here in this school? So yes, talking about the beauty of education and how brilliant it is to be teachers and educators, but also why are we here, particularly this school, serving particularly these pupils? And that kind of contextual narrative, I think there's a huge, really compelling pull that brings people together in a really positive way. So doing some of that exploratory work and talking about what makes us special as a school, and why are our priorities linked to this school? Why would our priorities not work in any other school? Can be quite powerful to bring people together and to have that really clear sense of shared endeavor.